So, welcome to episode 17 of the Dear Black ED podcast, where we explore the stories, challenges, and triumphs of Black leaders in the nonprofit sector. I am your host, Jade Nicole Neverdon Merritt, founder and executive director of the BLK ED Network. Today's episode is all about building the philanthropic muscle and boardroom excellence in mission-driven organizations. We'll dive into fund development strategies, the scale impact, the art and science of governance optimization, and leadership practices that sustain growth and resilience. Our guest is Anike Edmonds Coates, a nonprofit leader, fund development strategist, and principal consultant at AEC Consulting. Born in Santa Barbara and raised in Baltimore, Anike currently serves as the Director of Development and Communications for Acterra, Action for a Healthy Planet, and is the founder of AEC Consulting and a proud Black ED board member. With more than 25 years in fundraising, events, marketing, and communications across youth development, education, housing, and women's empowerment, Anike's career includes leadership roles at Big Brother and Big Sisters of the Bay Area, housing operations for women, the HistoryMakers, and Huckleberry Youth Programs. She holds a BA from the University of Virginia and a JD from Columbia University. She is also a 2014 Next Generation Leaders of Color Fellow and serves on the leadership committee for the Alliance for Girls. Whether you're a development director seeking fresh approaches to donor cultivation, a board chair aiming to sharpen your governance practices, or you're an ED like me, ready to deepen your organization's financial and cultural foundations, this conversation will give you practical insights and strategies that you can use the right way. So, without further ado, let us welcome the strategic and accomplished Anike Edmonds Coates to the Black ED podcast. And yes, if you haven't figured it out, Anike is my cousin, so I get to brag on her and share with you all the genius that I already know. So welcome, Anike, to the Dear Black ED podcast.
Well, thank you, Jade. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today. And thank you for that lovely introduction.
Awesome. Well, we are so excited to have you here. And of course, like I said, I already know the amazing work that you do. And so I get so excited to share this with others in terms of your leadership skills and your expertise with over 25 years in the nonprofit sector. And so we'll start off getting a little bit of a background today. And so, of course, you grew up in Baltimore, you earned degrees at UVA and Columbia Law, and then dove right into the nonprofit sector. And so just to get a little bit of background, what are some of your personal experiences that first drew you to this particular work?
Okay. Well, I will say a little bit of a correction because I didn't go right into nonprofit work. So, I went to law school and I did legal work, business affairs, work for a few years. And I think, to be quite honest, back in the day when I went to college and grad school, I do not know that there were a lot of programs that were about nonprofit management. I think right now you could I know for sure you can get a master's in nonprofit management. It might be an undergraduate major or something that would lead you to that work, but that definitely was not on the table when I was in college. I was, pretty sure I was going to go to law school. Now we are a family, as you know, we're part of a family that is very much into service. Mm-hmm. So, doing service, giving of yourself, doing work outside of your regular paid work. I think, back then we really just called everything charity work, was something that we did in our personal lives and was expected of us. But honestly, I did not know that it was a career path at all. So going into law school and the first few years after that, that wasn't necessarily on my vision board, let's say. But I did start work for a friend of ours that had a business, was starting a business. Their business was in real estate development, but they needed a lot of writing. And because, as a lawyer, always just is something that I was interested in, I started doing some writing work for them. So just marketing materials, MOUs, then that moved into grants work. And then that is when I learned that work had a title, that there was a field called development and fundraising. I think prior to that, I probably only thought about fundraising as it related to maybe in schools, in higher education settings where, you alumni directors raise money for schools
Mhm.
and things like that. And then church, those were the two things in terms of like really knowing a little bit about how those two organizations or institutions worked. That's the only place I really saw fundraising up until that point. So yeah, that's when I started doing that writing work. That's when I realized that what I was doing was development work. And then I moved quickly into that because that's basically the impetus there was, oh, there's these skills that I have that I really enjoy,
Mhm.
writing, communicating with people, convincing them of something, right?
Mhm.
Persuading them to give or be on your side, whatever that may be. And I can do that outside of the legal world and like for a benefit. I can see how the impact right away. It's not just a contract or a corporate transaction. This would be, more fulfilling. But again, still, that was just the beginning of it there. But then, as I moved to a new city and was looking for new work, I was like, okay, so there's this whole field out there that is about this development and fundraising, also combining the marketing side. As we know, most nonprofits that aren't huge and really well staffed, that marketing and communications department is the same
Yes.
as the fundraising department. So, that combined really the skills that I had and things that I like to do with a good purpose.
Awesome. So you talk about kind of like getting your start with like doing some writing for some friends that kind of had some businesses going. And then you transition, as we know, you will back to California. And then you started doing some work with BBS, Big Brothers Big Sisters Bay Area, housing opportunities for women, Huckleberry Youth Programs. And so you kind of talk about where kind of this started, but through some of these roles in each stop along the way, how did that really help you to shape your own fund development philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, I think with each one, I probably learned a little bit more, of course, and honed in on what worked for me as a leader in fund development or strategy wise. So if I go in order, I was in California at the beginning when I first started kind of doing the development work freelance, moved to Chicago, which is where the HistoryMakers and housing opportunities for women. And I will just say, I mean, just at the beginning, it was really housing opportunities for women. I was the grants institutional giving person, so very specific role there. HistoryMakers was a lot of individual giving. So I think what was helpful for me was that each one of these jobs early on, Big Brothers Big Sisters, I was corporate and institutional giving at the beginning, and then moved on to run the department. But I got a look at each bucket, let's say, of fundraising. Whenever I'm doing consulting with either a new organization or a new leader, we always talk about the different buckets of revenue when it
Mhm.
comes to fundraising. And, most of the times we're talking about individual giving, we're talking about corporate giving, foundation grants, maybe government contracts and events. And sometimes you might work at an organization that's really heavy on government contracts or, lopsided in some instances towards one type of giving or one bucket. And that's hard
Mhm.
because we always want to diversify our revenue streams.
Right.
And it's hard if you are a leader of an organization that has not really worked in each one of the sections. So for me, it was really great coming into kind of where I am now in development is that I have had a role basically in a specific, specified role in each one of these areas. So there's a time when I was the person that managed events, time when I just managed grants, et cetera. So I got a lot of practice in those areas. So that really helped me in terms of I think being able to assess an organization, the strengths that they have in each one of those areas, and then what makes sense for growth with
Mhm.
those organizations. We're all trying to grow. Nobody just wants to be like, oh, we have $1 million budget and that's where you want to stay forever. You want to grow. And the hardest part about determining the growth trajectory or even potential for an organization is determining which areas are best for you. You can't just say, of course, we all want more unrestricted foundation giving.
Yes.
That may, or really, we all want more individual gifts. I think is always, that's the thing that's the same across the board for every organization. That's where we want to grow, because individuals do not have to change their priorities every 3 years. They don't normally require reports and things like that. But having worked in each one of these specific roles at very different types of organizations, it has allowed me, I think, to determine what's best for, when I go to a new place as the leader of the whole department, where can this organization really grow, and not just have the stock answer of, yes, we want to grow individuals. Yes, we want to grow foundations. But no, for this organization, it's really only going to make sense to focus on this area for this period of time, because this is your low hanging fruit. This is your history. This is your mission. This is what people relate to. And it may not resonate in the foundation world. This is more of an individual giving, focus or priority. So it just depends. Like you said, I've worked in organizations that really kind of run the gamut. So at an organization that's focused on housing, that's an organization that has a lot of clear, tangible results that they can give to funders. And so that type of organization does really well with foundation applications, and especially for housing, there's going to be government grants because it's housing. And
Right.
that's, a right that a lot of states and cities are going to support. So there's going to be funding there. But if you are an organization that has strong like data, deliverables that really speak to a certain type of funder. Now, as people that work in nonprofits, we know that all of our work, no matter how great it is, does not always transfer into these numbers. You can't just say, give us $10,000 and 1,000 people are going to be served, and here's the great little chart of, how we served this group of people. Some nonprofits really fit into that mold. And if you do, there's a certain type of funder that's really out there for you. But if you are an organization that works more like a Big Brothers Big Sisters, where you are a mentor and everything can't be tracked, that the success of a mentor-mentee relationship is not just in numbers, right? So that's harder. And that may be a place where you want to focus on individuals, because individuals get it, but it might not translate into necessarily a super strong grant application, right? Depending on what that funder is looking for. A lot of funders just have equations and numbers and, this is the cost per person served. And if it doesn't add up to what they think is a good number for cost per person served or cost per service delivered, you might not fit into their, I don't know why I'm forgetting this word right now, but into their whatever they use to determine if you get funding or not. You know what I'm talking about. But so I think having worked with these different types of organizations, and really, like I said, in each role with the different buckets of revenue, it's helped me to be able to strategize better in terms of growing an organization's revenue, donor base, and everything as it relates to their fundraising strategy.
No, I think that's awesome. One piece I wanted to kind of explore, because you talk about kind of like different buckets, really understanding the organization, what revenue stream makes the most sense. As we are in a different time, I would say, where we see a lot of federal funding being cut. You talked about with housing organizations, and a lot of that funding comes from government agencies. And so what types of trends, or do you have recommendations for folks who may be experiencing loss of fundings, or, what does the lens from a fund development lens, how are you seeing the landscape as it is now in terms of whether individuals are giving more or less during this time, or foundations kind of pulling back? I know just kind of leading Black ED Network, there's tons of conversations about, funding right now for organization and ideas around shared leadership models even. And so could you just share a little bit, just given the current landscape of, DEI rollbacks, funding initiatives, government funding being cut. What are some things that organizations can start to think about in terms of funding?
Right. No. Yeah, things are definitely changing. And so first thing, which I know all of us already know, regardless of the current landscape and climate that we're in, as leaders of organizations, you are always trying to make sure you're prepared for things to change. Nothing is going to stay the same. So of course, my number one recommendation as it relates to funding is in your planning, it should always be flexible and resilient. And we always say too that there's no need. A lot of people have strategic plans and maybe 5-year strategic plans. There's really no need to have a strategic plan that goes beyond 2 or 3 years, because even if you are completely on track and successful with every milestone, something's going to change. Like if you are completely successful with everything that you do in the first 2 to 3 years of your plan, you might need to change it to make it harder, or, to make it a little bit more intense, focus on something else. You easily hit all of those goals. So there's that. Then, of course, the next thing I'm going to say, and this might sound just a little trite, is that it really depends on the industry, right? So I am currently working a lot in climate field and environmental policy and change. So we're definitely, that whole field is being impacted by government changes, government funding right now. And it depends on how, what your split is between government grants and foundations. But yes, there are a lot of organizations being impacted by that. So currently, right, it depends. If you listen to NPR, you hear that they are defunded. If you're in the arts, you know that is, they're having a lot of struggles because they had so much government funding as well. So from the arts to climate education across all fields, right, there's people are being impacted by the change. And I think the first part is you go in and you analyze again, how are your buckets being filled up? What percentage do you have as government, individual, corporate, foundation, events? And where are the places where you can be flexible? Where are the places that you think you're resilient? What are the places that you need to shore up, right? So I think that's how you have to approach it in something like this. Okay, if we're about to lose $250,000 over here from government funding, and we've never actually had maybe we don't do big fundraising events, well, then I'm not going to say that I can get $250,000 from events this year. It means we're going to have to look at foundations, maybe corporate, discretionary funding that people have, building partnerships. It's not going to happen in probably a fiscal year. This is going to be a partnership growing year, especially this year. I think for most people, like literally, if you are impacted by changes in government funding this year since the beginning of 2025, you are working right now and planning for next fiscal year. And what are the areas? Okay, let's say we lose some additional funding next year because of our partners lose funding. What are we doing to shore up, be resilient, be flexible for next year? So you're looking at your buckets, you're seeing where your lowest hanging fruit is. Do we have individual donors that we can move up? Can we get more from our individual donors? That might be a no too. Like, again, depending on your field, and I don't want to make blanket statements, but you may have, if you're in the arts, that is traditionally an area where people give large sums of money, and they give money because it's their discretionary income, right? If you are running a church, people are giving a part of their own income, and if things are bad for them, then it's going to slow down for church giving, right? And then there's everything in between. You have, it is what it is, and that there are different, different types of, let's say, income levels normally give in different ways, right? So if you are in an area where your individual giving is strong and your donors are not regularly impacted by what, let's say, the average person is, then that's where you should go to shore up your money for this year. But if that's like, if your average donor, you have a lot of donors, but they're $50 and $100 donors, they're not going to turn into $5,000 donors this year. So you just have to figure out who your donors are, and then where it's possible to get more income. And then the other part is, it may not be about, getting more people in the major donor category or replacing the contracts from the government. That may not happen, but you may have to figure out how to retell your story as a result of what's going on. That may be where, you're just going to have to get more. You may not move people up the ladder, like we call it, moves management and development. we're not going to lose 500,000 over here and all of a sudden get our current donors to give more. What we
Right.
have to do is go out and get more donors. And that will be through storytelling, and not necessarily the story of, oh, we lost all this funding because of this, but just you've never heard our story before. We're just introducing, we're now going to focus on introducing ourselves to more people, because I think we all get caught in kind of the complacency of the current group that we have. And that's not bad. We definitely want to steward your current donors, move them up the ladder if possible. But then you also just need to get some new donors sometimes too. And they're not going to be huge. If they're new, they're not necessarily going to be huge at the beginning, but you have to bring them in at some point.
So you talk about storytelling. And so, like, as a strategist, what are your thoughts for organizations? So we talk about, like, kind of in this time, kind of how we can shape our stories, but how do you weave in kind of like the community engagement piece as well as authentic storytelling to compel, funders, donors to give to organizations? How can folks be more effective around storytelling with their organizations?
Yeah, it's interesting because I just was having this conversation with a colleague, and we were trying to figure out how to get really more unrestricted foundation funding, and wondering, it's hard. Number one, anyone who has done a grant application recently, you probably did it online. It was electronic. You had a word limit for every single section of the grant, for every question. So it's hard to talk about everything when you can only do it in 500 words or 500 characters, right? And then we're an organization where I currently am right now. We do a lot of work. There are a lot of programs. It is like almost impossible to get everything across in 1 to 3 pages, let alone in these little paragraphs. So we're like, okay, we really want to focus on our foundation, unrestricted funding. What do we need to change about the way that we're presenting ourselves and be authentic? So we're not changing it just because that's what someone wants to hear, but we obviously, maybe we need to present ourselves a little differently because we're not as successful in this bucket as we would like to be. And I have this template, and Jade, I know you can help me here because I still am losing this word of like the table that you use when you're kind of your sample table that helps you to write a grant, what your organization does, how you do it, or whatever. It's a good little tool to use. I've
Well, like
given
a
it.
SWOT tool or a program plan,
But I've sent it to you all in the other presentations that I've done. I am just losing that word right now. So we're going to move past that. But the key part of the tool and the exercise when I give it to people to do is, most people know what the mission of their organization is, right? Your vision, and then the programs that you deliver and how you're going to track your measure your outcomes. But there's the one part that's key when you're talking to a funder is, how are you delivering your program or giving your whatever your solution is? How are you doing it differently than someone else? Lots of organizations want to solve homelessness. Lots of organizations combat hunger. We need multiple organizations to tackle similar issues. But if I'm funding you, I want to know what is your unique approach to this, right? And so that's the part that I think you can only get across in the storytelling. And that's how you have to figure it out. And again, that can bring in everything that we have right here, the community engagement, what you're bringing to all communities, your DEI being equitable, how you're showing that that's your focus, and really telling the true story of your programs. But when I was talking to my colleague, we were like, okay, we have these grant applications and we run down the programs that we do, but we're not maybe necessarily saying, what's so great about this? Yes, we are providing local solutions to global problems, global problem being climate change. We're providing local solutions, but I don't know how much we say past that, right? So we really need to say, when we say that, we are saying that we are equipping individual people in the community with the information, the opportunity, the tool to make a change as it relates to climate right now themselves. Most people think climate change is such a huge issue that they either can't do anything about it or the things that need to be done are too expensive. I can't afford an electric car. I can't, electrify my home or I can't be vegan or something, like,
Right.
but there's smaller things that we can do to have an impact on climate change. And that's what our organization does. We help with that, and then once you break it down or get it to that level, then you go out and you get the story that tells that. So I'm telling you that I know how to help you make a dent in this problem. So then we go out and we can interview someone that bought their first EV, that, turned their house electric, that didn't go all the way electric, but just started with a heat pump and changed their HVAC system, whatever it is, small steps. Then you have that real story. That's the authentic part of it. And maybe that works for a particular funder or that works for a person who wants to give.
Logic model.
Yes, that is what I was trying. Yes, why did I leave? And that's like required in every grant. And I could not, yes, logic model.
Yes.
That's the key part of the logic model. Everybody's trying to solve a certain problem, or lots of people are trying to solve this problem. How are you doing it differently? How do the people that come to your organization leave differently than if they went to another organization? And not that yours is better, but this is just the approach you're taking in the particular lane that that you're in.
Awesome. No, I think this is very helpful, just because I know that's a question that we get quite often when thinking about like how we're telling our story, because we are experiencing, cuts in funding, and it's a very competitive space. And what is the compelling message about your organization that is going to, secure the funding or land the funding? So I think that's helpful. I want to transition a little bit because I know you do a lot of work with like board governance and strategy. And so many nonprofits, as we know, struggle with board dynamics and fundraising alignment. And so how have you helped boards specifically become more strategic partners in the development piece as well as governance?
Right. Well, as we know, boards are made up of individuals. So you are going to be dealing with a lot of different personalities. And even though everyone on a particular board may share the passion for that particular topic, homelessness, climate impact, it does not mean they share anything else in common, right? So you're just going to have to manage personalities all the time when you're dealing with the board. So I think my number one recommendation, especially when it comes to newer organizations, is really a lot of organizations will create themselves, make bylaws and talk about boards with 20 people and this is, all of these things where it's like, are you really able as one person with no staff to manage a board with 20 people? That's crazy. That's nothing that you should be doing. So you need to think about your board kind of the same way you would think about growing a staff. What do you have the capacity to manage? Because even though the board manages the ED and is your boss, you still have someone on your team has to manage the board. And if you're a small organization, it's going to be you as the executive director. So first of all, think about what you can manage when you are growing your board and how many people are on it, because that will be the number of personalities and everything else that you will have to manage as well. I think the next part is just as in everything else, like you have to make people feel involved and engaged, and you have to give them the tools to be able to do that. So the worst thing in the world is feeling like you don't have the tools to be successful, whether it's as a board member or as an executive director. So it's really a symbiotic relationship between the two. We have to give the board the information that they need, the access to the tools and resources they need to be able to speak fluently about the organization, as well as anything else. They want to see a list of last year's donors. They want to know how many people are in this category. What's the best way to host an event? Please help me with my elevator pitch. Those are all the things that a development director or ED of an organization is going to have to provide and give to the board. So that I think that naturally leads to them becoming better strategic partners. I think on the governance side, sometimes, you may have boards that are too in the weeds. That's really a function of, unfortunately, just the ED and how that's set out from the beginning. Like, you have to be clear about their role, and board members need to know their roles from the beginning. There shouldn't be anybody on a board and, 8 months later thinking that they should be involved in whether or not somebody gets hired or fired or,
Yeah.
other than the ED. If they feel that way, then you did not make it clear to
Mhm.
them what their role was. So, I mean, you have to set out clear roles. And then, like I said, I think as long as people feel engaged and are given the tools that they need, I think that makes them stronger partners on both sides. But I deal mainly with them in development. The governance, those are just rules, those are a lot of just nonprofit rules too in general. People just need to know them. But if you start out small and you really want a board to kind of help you operationally, you still have to be very clear about when that changes, because then those board members might think they can still play that role once you've been, fully staff up your organization. They have to know that they are not employees of the organization. They are the fiduciaries. So
I think that is very key in terms of setting expectations, helping them to
mhm,
understand their roles and responsibilities. I think that is going to be very key just to engagement, because you lose people when they're not really clear about what their role is and how
exactly.
show up and function within the organization. So, in terms of diving a little bit back towards kind of some funding strategies, specifically, what key indicators do you track to prove real world impact to funders? And how do you balance those outcome metrics with stories that will bring donors in?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it's different for every organization, but I think the big divide is kind of between organizations that have really clear measurements and outcomes. Like I said, at Housing Opportunities for Women, we can tell you how many women we moved from homelessness into supportive housing. And
Mhm.
we could really have a clear number, right? Like, it costs $12,000 per woman and family. It's very easy to calculate. This is the rent subsidy. This is, how much that is. And so in an organization like that, that's very easy to kind of come up with the indicators, because there's one thing that we're doing. And if that is what is important to a funder, there we are. Different funders are going to tell you, we don't want to spend more than $1,100 per person or something like that, where it's like, well, what we're doing costs more than that. And so maybe we're not the one you want to fund. But those are, like I said, it's a much easier in an organization like that, where the numbers are clear and then the stories are clear. The stories are strong. I mean, especially with something like moving women out of home, women and children out of homelessness into housing, into the point where then they take over that housing subsidy themselves. That's a whole trajectory. We can track that for 5 to 8 years. We have an ongoing story. That's great. Much harder with like a Big Brothers Big Sisters of the Bay Area, because we are enlisting mentors. Really, the money kind of is to pay staff, right? So then we have to figure out, because we're not paying the mentors. You sign up, your big sister, you see your little sister twice a month, you pay for your activities that you
Right.
do with your little sister. So someone might say to us, so what are we giving to, But obviously these relationships can't go unsupported. They need the staff, the case managers. I think that was not the exact title that we used, because they weren't case managers, but they need their support staff to help them to figure out what to do with the kids, et cetera. But also, there were things that we tracked, but they were like emotional and socio stability factors. This child was missing this many days of school. Now she's not. She wasn't as confident before in school. Now she's not. Those are totally different from maybe tracking, other children's programs, right? But the outcomes or the impact of this program could be just as important as a very clear cut program where this many kids got served and this many kids got free lunch, or this many kids got free transportation to school, and our numbers may be different. But what you have to do then is you have to move away from the traditional tracking messages and, let people know that this is what's important here, that this mentorship, that this emotional growth and stability that this child is going to have after 6 years of mentorship means that they are more likely to go on to a full-time job, higher education, and stay out of the system. And we do have that proof, but we just need to tell people that that's not the only way to track things, not the traditional way. And that's hard with a lot of funders. We have to tell funders that asking for reports 6 times a year isn't realistic either. We're nonprofits that are, hardly staffed. Like, do you want us to use all the money for us to just do reports or actually deliver programs? So, you have to, I would say with the question, it's like you balance the outcome metrics with the stories, but I think it's like you match your metrics to what you really do, and then the stories are there, right? As long as you're not trying to, I can't give you the metrics that maybe another program can give you about improved grades, because mentors are not there to take kids from this reading level to that reading level. But maybe over the course of time, their grades do improve. But I've got to tell you what metrics make sense for the program that I'm delivering. And that happens through a story, because I don't have these, strict numbers that maybe another program has.
No, that's something that's great to think about. I cannot believe we are almost at time. Like, I feel like we could just keep going.
Right.
Like, because this is a topic that I think is just so many organizations are just trying to navigate, kind of like this funding space. So as we are at time, maybe we need like a part 2 or something. But before we close out, I wanted to see what is next for AEC Consulting. Any new partnerships, any new services? What is next and in store for you?
I love the work that I do in the development space, whether it's, kind of tackling a whole department for an organization and managing, both the fundraising and the partnerships and communications. I also just like being a strategic partner for people, like in a nice, concise amount of, specific amount of time. So I'd love to continue to work with organizations on their strategies, and no matter kind of where they are, like as a brand new organization or an organization that needs to make a shift, or just kind of that regular strategy period that may happen every 2 to 3 years, and making sure they're on track. So I look forward to kind of building some new partnerships there and helping people with strategy and shifts that they may need to make in this space and still be successful in their fundraising efforts.
Awesome. So if folks want to connect with you directly, we will most certainly drop your information in the chat. But how can folks reach out to learn more about your services and be that thought partner around strategy?
They can always find me on LinkedIn, and then, which is probably the best way. I check that a lot. Or you can give them my email, AnikeCoates@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, we will most certainly drop that information for our listeners to be able to engage with you and reach out. But it has been a pleasure, Anike. Like I said, I feel like we need a part 2. Like, I feel like it was just like so much more information that we need to get from today's conversation. But I always knew how super dope you were in this space. And so what a privilege it is to be able to share on this platform.
Well, thank you. And I am always willing to do a part 2, so we can do that. That's nothing but a thing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Anike. And folks, tune in next month for episode 18, where we will have Jay Nawachu, who is the CEO of Innovation Works. So signing off from episode 17, Dear Black ED Podcast, Strategic Fund Development and Board Excellence with Anike Edmonds Coates. Thanks. Till next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.